Now, just a few words about the internal life of Polish Jewry. Polish Jewry, in some ways, was a melting pot. It melted different Jewish tribes in what one Yiddish critic called a schmelztopf, or a melting pot. You had the Litvaks from the Vilna region. You had the Galician Jews, many of whom were Polish-speaking and who lived under the Habsburgs in a totally different tradition. You had the Hasidim from central Poland. You had Polish-speaking doctors and lawyers. And all of these groups now became citizens of this new Polish Republic. And thanks to the political parties, the newspapers, the theaters, common concerns, by the late 1930s, you really could talk about Polish Jewry in a way that didn't exist in 1920. Now, one of the things that I really had to think about in this new Jewish museum in Warsaw, and I was the chief scholar for the interwar gallery, working under the great leadership of Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimlet. But one of the things that we really had to remember is that you should not look at interwar Polish Jewry through the prism of the Holocaust. That is, we know about the Holocaust, but they didn't. And if you look at books about interwar Polish Jewry, what are the titles? Celia Stupnitska Heller, On the Edge of Destruction. Emanuel Meltzer, No Way Out. Jacob Leszczynski, Auf den Rand von Abgrund, On the Edge of the Abyss. You get the picture, right? In other words, these poor people were doomed. But it would be a mistake to look at Polish Jewry, however beleaguered, however pressured, as a doomed group of people. We know that they were murdered, but they didn't know that. And so we have to look at them as they saw their own lives. And this was a very proud and vital community. One of the most salient features of interwar Polish Jewry was a paradox. And what was the paradox? Assimilation had never been weaker, and acculturation had never been stronger. Meaning that this 19th century dream of we can be Poles, of the Mosaic persuasion. We can not only speak Polish, but we will be accepted by our Polish neighbors as Poles. We'll go to Tolmatsky synagogue and they can go to church. Otherwise, we're part of the same people. That dream was now finished, finito, done. There were still a few Jews who believed that, but very, very few. On the other hand, more Jews than ever were now speaking Polish as their first language. You had 95% of Jewish high school students studying in Polish as their language of instruction. In Galicia, 80% of Jewish pupils were getting their education in the Polish language. In Poland as a whole, over 60%. More and more of the younger generation were speaking Polish. Now, here in America, your average Jew, I think it's safe to say that, will read the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Boston Globe, and for their Jewish news, they might read a Jewish weekly. How do you explain the fact that in interwar Poland, and by the late 1930s, the fastest growing newspapers, the fastest growing Jewish newspapers, were 3 dailies, Jewish dailies in the Polish language? Nasz Przegląd and Nowy Dziennik and the Chwila in Lwow. Why would Jews read a Polish Jewish newspaper instead of a Polish paper? The Polish Jewish newspaper Nasz Przegląd and the others had Polish news and Jewish news, articles about the weekly Sedra, articles about Hebrew and Yiddish literature, first-rate articles about Polish literature. But why wouldn't Jews read the Polish press? The answer was that the psychological gap now, even between Polish-speaking Jews and Poles was becoming greater and greater. And so you began to have in Poland the formation of a new subculture, a Polish-speaking Jewish subculture, which was the fastest growing sector of the Jewish community. The other point to make about interwar Polish Jewry, and here I'm reiterating a point first made by the late Professor Konrad Szmeruch, is that Polish Jewry was developing what we might call a polysystem, meaning that this growing use of Polish was not a zero-sum game. It didn't mean that Yiddish was automatically declining, although there are signs that it was. What it meant was that the culture of Polish Jewry now was being negotiated in 3 different languages, so that a Jew might speak Polish in his daily life, read a Polish newspaper, read a Polish Jewish newspaper, but go to the Yiddish theater, occasionally read a Yiddish book, and take a great interest in the developing Hebrew culture in the Yishuv, which was being widely reported in the Polish Jewish press. Palestine became the center of Hebrew culture, but Polish Jewry took a great interest in that culture. So you had a multilingual cultural life of interwar Polish Jewry. And faced with no choice, Polish Jewry developed a far-flung system of self-help, organizations for healthcare, an amazing cultural life, and it was, in many ways, for all of its problems, on the eve of World War II, still a very resilient community.